Hi there, everyone. Yep, so I'm Tom Pine. I'm the local funding officer for the National Lottery Community Fund in Stoke-on-Staffordshire, and I do live in Stoke, so very, very local. We're the UK's largest community funder. Lots of you may know us or have had funding from us through either the Awards for All programme, which usually runs up to £10,000, or the Reaching Communities programme, which traditionally goes up to £500,000. In normal times, I would give you a presentation about those two programs, and they are great general options for revenue funding, so funding for delivering projects and benefits to people effectively, and for delivering capital funding. The difference today, unfortunately, depending on your view, is that those programs are currently suspended, and those are unlikely to restart until October. There's also a sort of question about what those programs will look like from October. So we are anticipating that there will be some renewed or continued focus on the kind of impacts of COVID and the way that organizations need to respond to COVID going forward. But we're not entirely sure how that will look. And in fact, I've just come off a Zoom call immediately prior to this one, where there were any numbers of conversations happening about what that's going to look like beyond October. So what I can say on our normal funding products is they will become available again. They will look somewhat like they used to, but it's difficult to give you a better steer on exactly what they will look like when they do restart. And there is likely to be significant competition for those funds as well. In terms of what I'm about to say, and in terms of our usual funding streams as well, I would refer you to the link that I've just posted in the chat, which takes you to our website. Also, inconveniently enough, that has been updated with lots of new information about our current funding in the last 24 hours and even this morning. Hence, I didn't put together a presentation because the presentation I would have put together yesterday would be out of date by today. It's simply one of those situations. So I'm going to stop talking about Reaching Communities and Awards for All, which are our normal funding opportunities, and I'm going to talk about what you can apply for at the moment. Okay, so if you click through to our website today using the link that I've posted in the chat, what you'll see is that most of our funding activity is focused on the current situation with COVID-19. And that's in two areas. Basically, we're looking at supporting organizations who find themselves in financial difficulties as a result of COVID-19. So some of those charities that maybe normally are very good at generating income, but have found it very difficult to do so in the current situation. We're also particularly interested in supporting communities with the impact of COVID-19. And that's in three areas, which again are listed on our website. So please do take a look. We're looking at organizations who support people and communities that experience challenge and difficulty as a result of COVID-19. And we're looking at organizations that provide services and support for vulnerable people for which there is increased demand as a result of COVID-19. We're also looking at organizations, of which VAST would be one, who connect communities and support communities to work together to respond to COVID-19. Now, all that's a bit of a mouthful. Effectively, I would put that in a nutshell and say, if your organization is supporting communities with the impacts of COVID-19, be they mental health, be they isolation, be that a need to deliver food parcels and hygiene essentials to people who have to isolate and still have to isolate, those kinds of projects are very much the sort of projects that we're looking at the moment. We're very busy in Stoke-on-Trent. Since the beginning of April, we've had 120 applications for this funding. We've actually awarded over £1.5 million in Stoke, Newcastle and Staffordshire Moorlands. That's not doing too badly against the 55 million awarded so far across the UK. So North Staffordshire is faring quite well. The key thing to know is that this funding closes very shortly. So you have until the 17th of August at midday to apply for this funding. The key thing is to click on that website link in the chat and get your application in. What I would say ultimately is that worry less about the spelling, the grammar, getting your application perfect, worry more about getting your idea to us. I think that's the key thing, really. We are sort of waiting and ready to respond to your ideas. ultimately time is of the essence, and that window is beginning to narrow. So that's the kind of key thing to be aware of. In terms of your eligibility, again, the details are on the website. You can apply for up to £10,000 only if you're just a small group with a constitution, or up to £100,000 if you're registered and incorporated as a charity. You can also apply if you're a CIC or clearly a not-for-profit company. Okay. The other thing to be aware of is that with this funding, you have one bite of the cherry. Because we're funding jointly with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport at the moment, we can't accept repeat applications. So you've got one shot, unfortunately. There are some exceptions which get a little bit complicated. And we kind of will be willing to explain those when people ask. But I don't want to confuse you too much. It would take up slide after slide in itself. But it ultimately comes down to when you last accessed funding from us and whether you accessed funding via lottery funding or government funding, and the whole thing does get quite confusing. The key thing is that for most organisations, you can access the government funding, the Community Coronavirus Support Fund funding from us once only, okay? So as I say, you have until the 17th of August to apply for this. Funding will then close. There will be a small opening for some organisations to submit emergency funding applications, particularly where your organisation may be the kind of group that hasn't been funded so much through us up to now. That would tend to be organisations led by LGBT plus people, led by people from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic and refugee communities, or disability-led organisations as well. Those will be the ones that may still be able to access a very limited amount of emergency funding from the 17th of August onwards, because generally speaking, those are the ones that have accessed less of this funding up to now as a proportion of groups that exist. From that point on, from the 17th, for most organisations, our funding is closed. We'll still be assessing applications that we've received. We have spent only 55 million of 200 million that's come from government, but the other 150 million pounds is pretty much accounted for by the number of applications that have now been submitted. So there is quite a long queue. It will take longer for us to assess applications now than it did, say, 6 weeks ago, for the simple reason that there are so many of them. So the key thing, as I say, is that after the 17th of August and up until October, there are only going to be very, very limited opportunities to apply for our funding. So the key thing, as I said, is go into our website, decide which funding is suitable for you, whether you want to go for under 10,000 or if you're a registered and incorporated charity over 10,000, and get your application to us as soon as you can. That means that we can get the funding to you as soon as we're able. Turnaround times on these applications under 10,000, potentially 3 to 4 weeks. Over 10,000, you might be looking at 1 or 2 months now, whereas earlier in the process, it was shorter than that. Does anyone have any questions? I know that's been a bit of a whirlwind tour. A lot of details have only been concluded in the last few hours. Hence, it's a little bit kind of off the cuff, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, I would refer you to the links that I've posted in the chat, and also to my own contact details. I can kind of try and field conversations about your specific funding needs where I can.
We've got one from Lynn, Tom, that says, can churches apply for this due to loss of income? We are a charity.
Yep, so the things that I would say, if you're a charity, yes, you can. Under 10,000, not a problem at all. Over 10,000, you'd need to be a registered and incorporated charity. So either registered with Companies House or a CIO. So, you know, have the word incorporation in terms of your kind of status. You can apply for loss of income. We have funded lots of charities around loss of income. I think the key thing that we'd be looking for is, once we've understood, you know, your charity's financial situation, we would then want to know, okay, if we fund in that gap that you've told us about, what impact does that then have in terms of benefit to the community? What does it enable you to keep doing? Those are the sorts of questions that we will ask. But rather than trying to formulate some perfect answer when you fill in the sections in our website, particularly if you go for over £10,000, we will get in touch and we'll say, okay, we need to understand this a little bit better. Can we kind of get an idea of the complexity of this situation and a little bit more about your work? So I think I know a little bit about what your church does already, and you know, we would pick up that conversation with you. Like I say, the key thing is really less to focus on the sort of the technical perfection of your application and more to focus on actually getting your application in, so that we can get those things considered and funded. We have put an emphasis on getting work funded as quickly as we can in the circumstances, and we will try and progress things as quickly as possible. But the kind of queue is getting longer and longer with every day that goes by. And so we are expecting to be still assessing applications in October that will have come in August. I think the earlier you get that application in, the quicker you'll be able to access the funding. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We've got one that says, is this for the 6-month delivery or is it extended?
Okay, so yeah, this is for, I should have said, the Community Coronavirus Support Fund that we currently are administering, which is the funding that I've spoken about, which is available now and up until the 17th of August. That is for work in most cases that can take place for the next 6 months. So we would normally expect funds to be spent on work to be complete within 6 months of your project start. And in most cases, we would expect projects, due to the nature of the kind of crisis nature of the funding, to start within a month of decision as well, albeit there's a little bit of flexibility on that.
Yeah, and then we've just got one, put in an application about 6 weeks ago for under £10,000. Any idea how long?
Yeah, can you tell me what your what the full name of your organisation is, and I will have a little fertile while everyone's talking and try and give you a kind of indication without giving anything away.
Are you okay to put that in the chat there again?
All right, yeah. So I'll look at that and I'll try and get a sense of what stage it's at for you. And I won't be able to tell you exactly when the decision will come, but I might be able to give you an indication as to whether